Hey folks, it's Swank Ivy with another Letters to an Asexual. This should be number 115, and I hope everyone who celebrates has had a great Pride Month. I know I'm a little late for well wishes on that, but better late than never. Today I am going to share something that is vaguely related to queer community plus asexual, and even though I wrote it a long time ago, a lot of the elements of this are still how I feel about the inclusion of asexual people, and so I'll just let my letter elaborate on that for you. I got this question sent to me anonymously as a Tumblr ask, and the anonymous person said, I am an asexual panromantic, and I can't decide if I should identify as queer. On one hand, I feel like the word does fit me well. On the other hand, I have met other queer people who feel very strongly that asexuals should not ever identify as queer, and I don't want to offend people. I know I've covered this in some other videos, but it always bears revisiting when we continue to have this issue. This year, I've mostly heard anti-bi sentiments about inclusion in Pride, like that people who are bi shouldn't bring their maybe straight boyfriend to Pride, etc. And it's just so nitpicky, it's so exclusive of the whole importance of Pride in the first place. And while someone who is attending a Pride parade or a Pride event as an ally is different from a person who is attending as someone who is in the queer community, I don't know why someone would want those people to not be able to support just because they aren't personally a queer person. Things like parades and whatnot seem like they should be pretty pan-inclusive. That said, asexual people have obviously continued to be the target of anti-queer sentiment. They don't necessarily take as kindly to asexual people calling themselves queer, especially if they are hetero-romantic asexual people with a cross-sex or perceived to be cross-sex partner, and or if they are aromantic and they don't have any visibly queer relationships. And obviously, people can fit into a lot of different categories with this if they're ace, but I'm gonna let my answer to this person cover some of the points I would like to address on this topic. So first I say to the person, well, honestly I think the most important thing for your identity is whether you feel it describes you. Nobody else is the gatekeeper on your identity. And I don't think I've ever heard a queer person say pan people are not queer, whether pansexual or panromantic or both. Well, unless they're engaging in bi or pan erasure, which I've definitely seen. Those are the people who claim that your right to identify as queer fluctuates depending on whether you're with a person who is your same gender at that time. Which is pretty weird to me, since as far as I know, nobody says you're not gay unless you're in a same gender relationship. No, they're gay all the time because of their attractions. But if you're bi or pan and in a different gender relationships, oop, no, you're straight now, even if you still experience same gender attractions. Anyway, as far as I'm concerned, if the word fits you, well, that's your answer. Now, when it comes to asexual people identifying as queer, I understand why an individual or a group might decide they'd like to only offer their space, resources, and interactive experiences with others who have experienced specifically their kind of oppression, prejudice, and discrimination. I get that. And I think, therefore, if you were a heteroromantic asexual person or an aromantic asexual person who doesn't have any relationships that are or are perceived to be same gender, there are specific types of issues you do not face. Some people want queer spaces to only deal with the subtypes of bullshit that they personally receive, even though other types of bullshit that originate from heteronormative roots affect asexual people too. But I believe they have the right to decide who they want to share their group and its resources with. The problem arises for me when they tell us what our experience is, incorrectly. And they exclude us based on incorrect definitions of what we feel, stand for, experience, all while painting us as out to steal their resources and invade their spaces. Because some types of asexual people do have straight or straight-passing privilege, they do tend to be more likely to behave in ways that less privileged people find alienating and offensive. But, in my opinion, that's a terrible reason to target aromantic and heteroromantic asexual people for exclusion, because intersectional and relative privilege is a thing. And white cis gay men are generally not categorically excluded from LGBT spaces just because they have all those other privileges and tend to also be more likely to exploit privilege / talk over others / minimize and erase the experiences of others. Everybody who has privilege does need to learn to check it in these spaces especially. And while that includes aromantics and heteroromantics, they are not the only ones who need to learn this skill and apply it. Heterosexual transgender people can say or do homophobic things. Gay cisgender people can say or do cissexist things. They both still get a letter in the acronym. It doesn't make a lot of sense to say a certain slice of the asexual pie can never belong because they might behave problematically due to perceived or actual privilege. People who are included already behave problematically, and that doesn't get them kicked out. I believe a spirit of inclusiveness should be the norm in queer spaces. And if any individual of any orientation behaves problematically, you address that with the individual, not with the blanket statements about that individual's orientation. I think it makes sense to consider asexuality inherently queer, though some people don't, both asexual and not. And I think it makes sense to include asexual folks in all types of queer-related groups, because the problems asexual people have in society are caused by the same heteronormative bullshit that other queer folks is, even if it sometimes manifests differently or is considered by some to be less serious or less pervasive. But that aside, I think it's a very big mistake to claim that queer identity hinges on who hates you and how they express that hatred. It's an identity. You don't become less gay or less trans if you start experiencing less homophobia or less transphobia. I refuse to accept the extremely flawed notion that whether we're allowed to identify as queer is entirely contingent upon how much we've been hurt and whether we can prove it. Asexual people in queer spaces are also not entirely there to take. They're not automatically appearing to hog resources and bogart the spotlight. And I think there's also something people miss when they vocally object to our inclusion. Asexual people offer something too. Because of asexual people's non-normative explorations of intimacy, they can bring a very nuanced and helpful perspective on relationships outside the box. Also, with any other support for others, they can and do offer as individuals. The idea that entitled asexual people want to claim queer and somehow ruin it is usually perpetuated by people who haven't actually looked at how being asexual affects our lives. What erasure and compulsory sexuality actually does to some of us, and how much some of us can experience prejudice and discrimination. But even if these folks have looked at some of our personal struggles, if they believe our experience is somehow too distinct from theirs or not as bad as theirs across the board without exception, I guess they have the right to say this space I am in is only for people I personally perceive to be suffering in the same ways and for the same reasons I am, despite that these folks frequently erase, minimize, and misrepresent asexual experience, and despite that they often don't see the folly of basing belonging on whether other people's actions have hurt you in a specific way that they acknowledge. I'm certainly willing to grant them control of their resources and space without challenging them directly. Asexual people who are aromantic or heteroromantic may cause and experience fewer problems if they test the waters by engaging with their local queer spaces in an ally capacity first. And statements that I've made along these lines have sometimes been oversimplified and suggested like, she's saying that asexual people can't be queer and they're only allies. It's like, maybe it was not sufficiently nuanced the way that I presented it, but this is in the spirit of both acknowledging that you cannot be forced to share your resources with anybody that you don't want to, and to protect people from going into hostile spaces. So especially at the time that I was answering questions like these on my Tumblr like a decade ago, there were more groups that were hostile to asexual people and perceived us as like straight light. And so sometimes it was, and continues to be in some cases, safer for ace people who want to find out, like, will I be welcome here, to approach places that have a broader inclusion and figure out, like, will I be safe here, or will people only open their arms to me if I'm one of these other specific letters in the acronym. Fortunately, there has definitely been a trend toward automatically including ace people in these spaces. Like, it's become kind of understood that, of course, an ace person would have a reason to be there, and that there's no reason to categorically exclude everybody from our orientation, even if being asexual is what you're identifying as queer because of. As an aromantic and asexual person, I use the term queer for myself, and I believe myself to be queer on basis of my asexuality. Unfortunately, there are some people who take kind of my nuanced approach toward it as me saying that ace people don't belong there, and that is absolutely not what I'm saying. I'm saying it, both as an acknowledgement that people can make a group for whatever they want, and they don't actually have to include you no matter what. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying, they are allowed to control their resources if they're the ones offering them. But that also, I don't think that they should categorically exclude us if this is the basis for why they're excluding us. And then just also, I want you to be safe. I don't want you to try to come to a place for comfort and belonging and then be harassed. So I think that taking kind of baby steps toward groups that you don't know their feelings or their thoughts on it is the safest way to approach whether you will feel comfortable there and whether your giving and taking in that environment is possible. Continuing with my response to this person, I say, but your internal identity, nobody gets to tell you what label fits you best but you. And in your case, Anon, as a panromantic person, you probably have experienced same-gender attraction, which qualifies you anyway. If someone was willing to kick you out based on categorical exclusion of any and all asexual people, it would make about as much sense to exclude trans asexual people or straight trans people, since they don't have same-gender attractions. If they have to go out of their way to make rules about why they should exclude all asexual people, and those rules don't apply to the other identities in the group, it's a pretty clear demonstration of the anti-asexual attitudes that they say we don't actually suffer under. I'm sure you've all seen expressions of that asexual people can't be discriminated against, that nobody hates us, that nobody dislikes us based on our orientation. And then they turn around and say things like this, which is a manifestation of that. So, in any case, I think that as a society, we are moving toward understanding how being ace and being outside the norm, being a sexual minority, being a marginalized orientation really is a thing. And I think the arms are opening more and more as we go forward. But of course, one of the downsides of visibility is what some assholes like to do with that once you're more visible. I can't tell you how often I have had, just even on the same day or in the same conversation thread, I have had people both tell me that there's no reason to talk about this because nobody's hurting us, and then people who are saying, you are gross, you're a terrible person, you're damaged, you're not facing your trauma, etc., etc. Just all of these boilerplate objections to asexuality as being a real thing. And of course, there's even violence voiced toward us. I don't want to repeat that in this video, but some of my other videos with giant trigger warnings on them have talked about some of the really awful stuff people have said about me, to me, things that they thought should happen to me because I'm asexual. This is not isolated. This is not like once in a while this happens. This is part of a trend, and definitely with no exceptions except for one time, every time I've spoken to the media, I've been harassed by, not just people who don't believe in the orientation or people who don't think it belongs being talked about with queer stuff, even we certainly get a lot of that, a lot of people saying I'm talking about this because I want attention or because I'm messed up or because it's cheaper than therapy, etc. But without exception, there have been really nasty things in the comments if they're not moderated. And I will say the one exception to that did have a heavily moderated comment section that was, progressive and queer friendly. So it was the one time that I spoke to the media and I didn't get any threats. I didn't get any really, really gross, violent comments. But and I've spoken to the media dozens of times, and every time I do, it comes with this cost. So, if you can't talk about this, if you can't be yourself, if you can't kind of speak up about what your issues are in a mainstream space without that kind of response, it does very easily show that there is this attitude out there. And just because it's just in a comment section doesn't mean that we don't encounter it in real life. I've certainly encountered it in real life. And for all the haters, it's not because I never shut up about this or that it's the only aspect of my identity that I think makes me interesting. Oh goodness, that is not true. As an aside, because I make these videos, I do get people who comment on it saying, like, is this your whole life? This is the only thing I see you doing. And I'm thinking, with the huge amount of stuff that is not about this that I put out on the internet and am not shy about sharing, it's really ironic to see people saying, like, this is all you think about, this is obviously an obsession and is a problem that you need to get therapy for because you don't do anything else. And they're saying that about somebody who makes one video on the topic in a month, every month. I make 12 videos on this a year. And yes, being an asexual activist is one of the important things that I have done, and I have done lots of other things like post essays and talk to media and write a book and all of that fun stuff. But it really is pretty funny that somebody who does have as many diverse interests that I not only engage in but post about and share content about, that they would still say, you're obsessed with this is the only thing that you do, and that's why people are harassing you, because they're tired of hearing you talk, they're tired of seeing your face. So basically, if the only way you can get people to stop harassing you is to never speak of it, that definitely also indicates that there is a social issue with people's perception of this orientation, that if they blame me for talking about it for the violence I then receive, yeah, it fits in pretty well with every other kind of queerphobia out there. I hope that helps put this into perspective for anyone who was wondering, do I belong in this pride situation? Will I belong if I try to go to an inclusive group that talks about queer issues? Can I help? Can I be helped? Absolutely. And I just want people to be prepared for these attitudes, because they are out there, and sometimes they are held by people who are in our actual community. So hopefully, just with more education and more exposure, we can get past that and we can understand that we can all be there to help each other. But until then, I want people to be safe, and I want people to be prepared. And, I want you to be able to come as your whole self to these kinds of groups, and, to mixed orientation groups as well, to talk about your experience and be able to give and take as much as you're comfortable with. With that, I will end this video, and I will see you next month. Thanks for watching.